Again, my name is Matt Altier. I am the Vice President for Administrative Services for the University of West Florida. I have not been here long. I started about 10 months ago. I came here from New Jersey, where I was the Vice President for a major university. And before that, I was in California, again working in a university. I started out in higher education in Miami, and I lived in St. Augustine for a few years. I did live in Spain for many years. Some of it was Air Force time, and some of it was as a contractor. But when I started at the university, the president, Judy Bentz, asked me to redevelop the campus and to try and get as much as we could out of what we had at the university. So that's what I was doing. And you probably have heard about some of our projects, including a hotel conference center, a new football stadium, some academic buildings and residential housing, and a whole lot of neat things that we're putting together at the university. 2 months ago, Judy asked me to take over what is known as WIFP, West Florida Historic Preservation, Inc. These are 28 properties owned by the university downtown. Most of you know them. Old Christ Church, the Wentworth Museum, the Museum of Commerce, the entire village of the cottages and the houses near and behind Old Christ Church. Absolutely wonderful assets. The president asked me to do something with them. So as I started researching what we could do with the assets, I went back to some of my background, my roots. Again, I grew up in central Pennsylvania on a farm right beside Gettysburg, and I was fascinated by the number of tourists that went to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania every single year. Having lived in St. Augustine, I was fascinated by the number of tourists that went to St. Augustine. As I researched this, I found out that it is a totally different tourist than anything we're used to in Pensacola. Pensacola does an absolutely fabulous job in marketing our beach assets, and we do have beautiful beaches, and we get a lot of tourists for our beaches, and that is perfect, and that is wonderful. And last year, I think we did about 3.5 million in tourism for the beaches. What we don't do well is we don't get the cultural heritage tourist, and I'll show you how I know that. And I'll show you some ideas of what we can to do that and the difference it can make. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Hold on. I think the university with Pensacola and the community, and it's going to be a team effort, can provide a massive new economy for this region. And we can do it by way of the cleanest form of economic development. Everybody knows about economic development with bringing in potential jobs with outside companies, but we have some assets that we can utilize, and I think we can do something like this. We can get to a point of where we're bringing an extra $1 billion to the annual Pensacola economy, and we create 10,000 jobs. And believe it or not, we can do this in the next few years. We do it by creating a brand new destination for that group of people called the Cultural Heritage Tourist. That tourism group, Cultural Heritage Tourism, is the fastest growing segment of tourism today. It is astounding at how big this group of tourists are. By all counts, it's anywhere from 5 to 10 times the size of the tourist group that go to the beaches. So again, we do a wonderful job getting the beach tourist. This group is even bigger. This is why. The United States is undergoing profound demographic change. There are 79 million baby boomers retiring over the next 10 years. The cultural heritage tourist is an older tourist, and the baby boomers feed this tourist group. Out of the 118 million adult travelers in the United States today, 78% of that group participate in cultural heritage activities. That goes back to that big demographic I just described that exists. This is what they look like, and these are some big differences as far as this group goes. They are slightly older. They're around 50 years old, 1/3 are over 55, and that's growing. And that's growing by 10,000 people a day. This group is likely to travel outside their region. In other words, they fly. They don't, they don't drive. And again, that's a big difference to the tourists that we're used to right now. They have higher incomes. They spend more per trip. On average, this group of tourists spends about $995 per person per trip. And that's how I came up with the $1 billion for an injection into our economy. I'm talking about just going after 1 million of this group of tourists, and we've just added $1 billion to our economy. A higher percentage are college educated, and here's another key factor at this group. They travel year-round. They're not seasonal. That's one of the reasons St. Augustine has a lot of tourists. This is what they do. They seek destinations where they can experience historic character. That's very important. They want an educational experience when they travel. They spend more on the cultural heritage activities. The fourth one down is very important. They do pay more for lodging, but lodging that reflects the cultural heritage of the destination. In other words, this is a group that likes bed and breakfast and boutique hotels. We don't have a lot of those downtown yet. And I found this interesting. They're dedicated shoppers at museum stores. They spend a lot of money at museums. What do they do when they get someplace? Well, they spend 33% of their time visiting historical places and museums and things like forts. We have forts, we have history, we have historic buildings, we have museums. We have everything that this tourist looks for. Here's another big wedge. 21% of their time is spent shopping. Again, they have a lot of disposable income and they use it. And then you can see the other wedges. And yes, they do go to the beach. 7% of the time when they visit someplace is visiting a beach, which means there will be cross-pollination between our beach tourist and this group of tourists, which is wonderful. Let them go back and forth. This group of tourists does a number of things for a community, and you can see them all. Besides educating the residents and the tourists about our history and tradition, it helps protect our historic and cultural resources. But I think more importantly than anything is the top left one. By going after this new market, we can promote economic and civic vitality and growth, brand new revenue stream, and a brand new tax base for a community. If we can get 1 million of these tourists spending $1 billion a year, we've just created a new tax base of between $30 and $40 million for Pensacola. So how many of these folks actually visit small towns? That was one of my first questions. I know it's a big group based on my research, but I wanted to see. Again, having lived in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, I looked at that first. It's a small town, only 7,000 residents, but 3 million of these tourists visit Little Gettysburg every single year. 4 million of these tourists visit Charleston, South Carolina, every year. Closer to home, 6.2 million of this group of people visit St. Augustine every single year. And again, one of the reasons St. Augustine has a higher number than Gettysburg is because these folks don't travel during just any one season. They travel during the middle of the winter. But it's much nicer to visit the South, like St. Augustine or Pensacola, in the middle of winter than it is Gettysburg when there's 3 feet of snow on the ground, and I know. We can deliver a new destination for this very different kind of tourist. There's a few things that we need to do, though. We need to revitalize our existing historic district. We're going to need to enhance the downtown with new development, but new development that is specifically designed for this brand new demographic. We need to connect the town. We have a lot of sections of town that include the Palafox, Main Street, and of course I'm singing to the choir, especially with Brian. I know he knows all this. The port, we have the historic village, we have the old cemetery. You know, there are other parts within Pensacola that need to be connected that have history. I think it's Belmont de Villas area is another neighborhood that we could include. Bottom line is we're disconnected. And you will see that the historic towns that are not disconnected, that make it easy to walk from one section to the other, do very well with this group of tourists. We would need to create a brand new marketing campaign centered around our history. We have the history. We have the 5 flags of Pensacola. We have something that no other town or city can brag about, and that is our history. There are a lot of beach towns up and down the Gulf Coast, and we're one of them. But I can tell you right now, there's Panama City and Destin and a lot of the other beach towns that compete for us with our beach tourists. They don't have the history. They don't have the historic destinations. They don't have the forts. They don't have half of what we have in attracting this new demographic. What we don't want to do, though, is create a monster marketing campaign to the world, bragging about our history and getting people here when we don't have the accommodations yet. We don't have the connectivity of the downtown or the infrastructure. Because the worst thing we can do is get a whole bunch of people coming here and they have a bad time. Remember, this is a group of people that will come here for a totally different visit than the group that we're currently getting. And if they have a bad time, they'll badmouth us and they'll go home and they won't come back again. If we do this right and we do what we need to do first and then attract this group through a marketing campaign and they have a good time, they will come back. On average, this group of tourists revisit a place 15 times over their lifetime. And I'm going to use Gettysburg as another example because, again, I live there. They'll visit once, and it's a short period of time. This group of tourists, their visits are shorter than the beach tourists. They only come for between 2 to 5 days. They stay in the B&Bs. They eat in the restaurants every single night, but they don't get to see everything the first time, so they want to come back. And they'll come back. And then if they have a good time the 3rd, 4th time, then they'll bring their grandkids back and their nieces and nephews. So they will keep coming back, but they have to have a good experience. One of the reasons I know we're not attracting this group of tourists right now is very simple. I went into the web pages that this group of tourists, the cultural heritage tourists, the websites that they currently use to plan their next vacation. Here's a big one. This is from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and that's the name of it, Places That Matter. Look at the bottom. Look at where Pensacola should be located. We're not on it. St. Augustine is, Charleston is, Gettysburg, Virginia, New Orleans. There are a lot of historic destinations that have partnerships with the Historic Trust, that have historic hotels, and they get them on there. We're not on it. So the very websites that this group looks at to plan their next vacation, we're not even on the map yet. Here's another list. This is right off the webpage of floridatravel.com. Florida's top 10 most walkable cities. Look, is at the top, St. Augustine. And some of these you would think aren't walkable, but they have downtowns that are connected. But again, Pensacola's not on it. Florida's small towns with big surprises. Pensacola's not on it. Here's a model, having lived in Spain, that I thought we could utilize, or a version of this model, in order to get this going. There are hotels in Spain, they're called the paradors of Spain. The government of Spain decided a long time ago to help create economic growth in small villages. They would utilize their historic treasures, their old buildings, buy them, renovate them, turn them into nice hotels, and then market it to the world. And they're called paradors, and they've done very well. And once the paradors are successful and they have a good clientele and they're on the map, then the government sells them to the private sector. But it's a way to jumpstart an economy when there aren't private dollars, or the private sector can't take the risk in starting something like this. This is hard to read, so I'm going to go down the list for you. But these are the things that I think we would need to do in order to put together this new tourism package for Pensacola. We would need to install new monuments and statues and plaques and places of interest all over downtown, just like the towns that I described, the Savannahs, the Charlestons, New Orleans, Gettysburg, San Luis Obispo in California, any village you go to in Europe. We need more monuments, and as corny as it might sound, maybe some large monuments, like an Andrew Jackson sitting on a horse with his sword drawn in Ferdinand Plaza, but the kinds of things that draw interest and people can read about, along with plaques and other interesting things downtown. We need to enhance the downtown and make it look more like it did 100 or 200 years ago, and that means tearing up the asphalt and putting in some cobblestone streets, or in our case, brick pavers. Judy Bentz, who, as you all know, is an archaeologist, pointed out to me very quickly that we didn't have cobblestone. We had brick pavers, but that kind of a look. We need to create more downtown sidewalks and pedestrian crossings that make it more friendly. Almost create, if you will, a history path. Something like the Freedom Trail in Boston, Massachusetts, where it's easy to cross the town or the city with very historical interest and places and things to read about, and it's all marked. It's very easily marked, and you can do it. And fill in some of the empty parking lots we have with some historic kinds of facilities. We do need to build the accommodations. 10 new bed and breakfasts and 3 to 5 boutique hotels in downtown. That would add about 300 rooms to our current inventory downtown, but it's the kind of rooms that this group of tourists look for. Again, we don't want to invite these folks here without having the accommodations, or they'll turn around and go home and they won't like it. There's a way I think we can do this using the parador model, and I'll describe that to you in a few minutes. 300 new rooms will not get us the kind of inventory we need for the first 1 million tourists, but with the existing inventory of existing rooms downtown on the private sector, it'll get us enough to get up to about 250,000 to 300,000 tourists. And I think that's a lot for the first year. We can get up to 1 million tourists in 2 or 3 years if we do this right. Once the people are here, the economy pumps up, the private sector will jump all over this. They need numbers in order to make a new project work, in order to get financing. It's a chicken and the egg problem is what we have. For the private sector to come here and build boutique hotels and open up bed and breakfast, they need the numbers. They need the tourists that will stay there. Until those numbers are here, they can't get the financing. It's a high risk. But we don't want the people here first if we don't have the accommodations, because, like I said, they'll leave with a bad experience. We need to make improvements to the Colonial Archaeological Trail, and that means adding some reconstructions all over downtown. The university has just an absolute wealth of experience and talent in the archaeology departments and the history departments. We have a lot of digs downtown. Right now, the digs are typical open holes with some foundations of what used to be, like the forts, the original Spanish fort that sat here. But there's nothing beside it. We need to recreate the corners of the forts that used to sit there so people see what it was. Right now, those holes in the ground are used more for trash bins than anything else, and it's a shame. So we have a lot of the assets that I'm talking about, but we need to finish them. We need to give these people things to do for 5 days. We need to create the ferry system, and I've heard a lot of talk about this, and I think there is funding for creating some sort of an infrastructure for a ferry at Fort Pickens, which is wonderful. But we need to finish it. We need to create a ferry docking system downtown, the infrastructure for that, hopping over with a water taxi to the new Maritime Park. Fort Pickens, finish that dock. Put one out at Fort Barrancas, which would connect the Navy Air Museum and the lighthouse, and then of course one at Pensacola Beach, so we can have that cross-pollination of the different groups of tourists that will be here. We will need to create a downtown trolley system. A lot of what I've described to you is very walkable, but I think there are a lot of outside historical places from the exact downtown that people will like to see, that we might have to take them on a trolley. And remember, this demographic is an older demographic and aging, so we do need to make sure that the downtown that we provide is accessible. In doing everything I just described, highlighted in blue are all of the properties that the university currently owns, including the Wentworth Museum, including Old Christ Church, and the houses that are along the road. The big building is the Museum of Commerce. We have the Museum of Industry. So there's a lot of properties we already own, and I can get started using the university with a couple of homes for, let's say, like 2 B&Bs. But what I show on here in red are the potential of other sites, other bed and breakfasts, other boutique hotels that could be developed around town. I've broken it into a couple of different site zones. And of course, this is just my initial shot at this. This can change dramatically, and there are people who will have much better ideas, which is wonderful. Oh, first let me go back to the main site. Follow the yellow brick road. Everything that you see in gold represents turning those roads from asphalt into the brick pavers that I described. Pulling people from Garden Street down into the historic district and Palafox, and then creating that historic look again with the streets. The city owns the plazas, Ferdinand Plaza and the Seville Plaza. I would suggest that the city get the idea of potentially leasing some of the land in the plaza to some of the restaurants. I put this right across the street from Jackson's so people can get an idea. If you can imagine a viable restaurant on one side with outdoor cafe seating under the big oak trees on pavers with the nice wrought iron furniture, and just having a couple of those in our plazas across the street from boutique hotels and other restaurants that would open, it would just create a very lively downtown. It would get people onto our plazas, eating and dining, and you know, it's the kind of thing that you see in every single town in Europe, and you'll see it in these historic towns that I described. We can do that on both our plazas, and I can do it with the plaza that the university owns. I'm just going to go through these quickly. These are just examples of boutique hotels from other towns, other cities. This one's from Seville, Spain. We own the Beacon building, which could be converted to a bed and breakfast or even a restaurant. The front door of that opens right up to the Seville Quarter. Wentworth Museum, I originally put this in here thinking that on the back of the Wentworth we could actually build a boutique hotel. Keep it as a beautiful museum, but the lobby could become the walkthrough and the lobby of a boutique hotel that's built behind it. But since I had this idea, I've heard even a better one. And so there are a lot of good ideas out there, but we have the historic buildings. I want to give you some other examples of how I know we're not attracting this demographic before I show you more. The university, with our historic properties, keeps records of how many people go through them. We sell tickets to not only the historic village but to the museums like the Wentworth, and we organize field trips. Last year, with all of our historic buildings in our village and the museums, we only had 67,000 people go through them, and 40,000 of those 67,000 were school children on field trips. That means we've got almost nobody going through the historic properties that we currently own, which is obviously not a good thing, but when you look at in the context of doing what I'm describing here, there's a monster market within the United States that we can tap that we're not tapping right now. Here's an example of just outside seating and a plaza, and that's the kinds of things that we could do at Ferdinand Plaza and the Seville Plaza. Bed and breakfast, a lot of these are right from Charleston, South Carolina. A lot of these historic towns have bed and breakfasts and boutiques all over the place. It's another one from Charleston. Another one from Charleston. There's one from Savannah. Gettysburg, I think, has about 35 or 40 bed and breakfasts and about 10 boutique hotels downtown. St. Augustine, same number. Charleston has more than anybody. But there's a reason, and I described it to you. That's another one from Charleston. That's an example of a boutique hotel, 3-story. And we can build them from scratch and make them look like they're part of the historic town. Streetscapes. This, again, just examples. Statues, more statues, pavers for sidewalks, connecting the town, creating a freedom trail or a historic sidewalk path, if you will, with other kinds of enhancements and amenities down there. Savannah, Georgia, beautiful plaza, again with a lot of pavers. And incidentally, along these pavers, they had them cleared out. They do put outside seating. There is a restaurant that sets up right under that oak tree. Here's an example of cobblestone streets in Charleston. Again, we wouldn't go with the cobblestone. We'd go with something more authentic, but the same kind of look. Another one, Charleston. Charleston. I threw this one in here because it's brand new. It's Eagle, Colorado, but I just wanted to give an example of what you can do just using new construction to make something look like it's historic. Charleston, we would need to do this. More cannon, more artifacts. The university under the West Florida Historic Preservation, Inc. has a lot. We have 150 cannonballs sitting in our basement, and we could utilize those and make sure that they get the little spot welds and put them in pyramids outside so people don't steal them. We've got big anchors. We've displayed one over by the fish house, but we've got some others that we could bring out. Donations, I think if we could start a project like this, would come in from private sector, and we could get the artifacts. Let me tell you something exciting that I learned, because I thought of this because I have the picture of the cannon up there. I was in a dinner sponsored by the Historic Preservation, Inc. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the guest speaker was a major historian from Alabama, but he started his career at Fort Pickens, downtown. He's worked in many of the museums and the forts that we have, and now he's in Alabama. He told us that he did research and found actual authentic records that proves that we have at Fort Barrancas the cannon that fired the very first shot that started the Civil War. To me, that is just absolutely amazing. Again, having lived near Gettysburg, I know how fanatic the Civil War historian tourist group is. They travel all over the country looking for different kinds of historic locations that have anything to do with the Civil War. Nobody knows that we have the first cannon that started the whole thing. If they did, that cannon alone would draw 1 million of these folks, I think. Again, Charleston. Here's just a quick kind of map of where a ferry system could go. Going to Fort Pickens, going to Fort Barrancas and the lighthouse and the Naval Aviation Museum, going out to Pensacola Beach on the back where all the restaurants are, going over to the Maritime Park. That would be an exciting piece to add if we go after this new demographic of tourists, because it gives them the not only the added value of a nice water trip, but we land at some very historic destinations that I think would be fascinating for them. They're fascinating as it is right now, but for this group, even more so. Now, let me describe to you the parador model and how I think we can put this together here. The university owns a lot of the properties, as I said. We have a very active and growing academic program called hospitality management. We also have a very active archaeological department and a historic department. All are majors at the university with a lot of students. We also have a very large and growing business, College of Business, with a lot of students. The hospitality management group of students need training, real-world training. What I'm going to suggest is that the university put this entire project together in one fell swoop, so we do not have to wait the amount of time it normally takes for a town like Charleston to go through the renaissance of becoming a historic destination. Charleston took about 12 years to become a historic destination for the cultural heritage tourists. Savannah took about 20 years. They started in 1979. and they didn't get to the point of where they could capture this group of tourists until just about a decade ago. We have the assets. We can jumpstart this thing with one project. University could build or renovate with existing properties the 10 bed and breakfast and 3 boutique hotels. We could manage them with our hospitality management program, hiring a private management firm to make sure that we do the business right, but having students working in B&Bs and in boutique hotels downtown. But we could also give that kind of environment to our archaeology students, our history students, and our business majors. The university would operate all of the facilities in the historic village, the museums, the B&Bs. I would lease as much possible space as I could to restaurants in the private sector, because I don't think we would need to do that on the restaurant side. I think we have enough private capital, enough companies that could open restaurants, and they would open fairly quickly. Under the parador model, which is the one we would copy, the university would not compete with the private sector in filling the rooms. We would ensure that all of the private existing inventory is filled first, and then we would take the overage. What that does is it pumps up the private sector downtown to a year-round tourist group and keeps them full. But with the added 300 rooms, we've created an inventory so that we can start marketing ourselves to the world. And once these B&Bs and boutiques have been running for a couple of years to where they have the good numbers that are necessary for the private sector to invest, we then sell them and make sure the private sector does a good job. I would keep maybe 2 B&Bs and 1 boutique under the university, under the same context though, non-compete, so that we have training grounds for our growing hospitality management program. That does a number of things. Like I said, it kickstarts this entire project so that we don't have to wait a couple of decades. I think we've got the assets. We're 80% there. Pensacola has been working, I think, to almost this point for 450 years. We just need to finish it. For the university, that would create not only another revenue stream to help the university, but a very unique learning environment for hospitality students, one in which is not duplicated anywhere in the United States. There are many universities across the country that run hotel conference centers on their university campuses, and they do incorporate their hospitality program into those hotels, but nobody has bed and breakfast and boutiques, which would be a very unique marketing niche for us. So that, in a nutshell, is the presentation. Where would I get the money? This entire project would cost about $50 million. $10 million to do the historic infrastructure, the cobblestone, the statues, the Freedom Trail, everything that we need to do downtown, the trolley system. We'd need another $5 million to finish the ferry infrastructure. That's $15 million. We'd need another $5 million for the initial annual marketing campaign that would have to go together, be put together once we're ready. Again, because remember, we'd have to be doing this nationally. We'd have to go into markets that we've never gone into outside our driving range. We'd be marketing ourselves to the Chicagos and the Philadelphias, New Yorks, Seattles. And I would need about $30 million to create the 300 rooms that we need in the boutiques. There is, under the Restore Act, the BP fine money, which will be distributed over the next year if everything comes together with Congress. Escambia County is due to get a chunk of the Restore Act money, and this is the BP fine money. And what I'm going to ask is if people are in favor of this project, that we take $50 million of that and we put it into creating a billion-dollar economy for Pensacola. Very small investment for that kind of a return. I don't know of any place in the world where you could get a return on investment of that magnitude. If it's the BP fine money, because it's quote-unquote free money, that's how I could do it with the non-compete contract with the private sector. I wouldn't have a mortgage on those facilities. I would make it part of our educational training program, but we create the inventory that is needed to attract this new group of tourists. If I had to bond the project that I just described to you and pay for it, then I couldn't, I would have to compete. I'd have to compete with the private sector because I would have a mortgage to pay, and I'd have that business model. So the best way to do this is to put it together with, I think, the BP fine money and get this thing started. We can be up to 1 million tourists in 3 to 4 years if we put this together. So I thank you, and I'm open to any suggestions or questions.